Now, I don't know what you know of Isaac Newton, but everything I've read of his tells me that there's no greater genius to ever walk the surface of this earth. I don't know if you've ever felt that about anybody. I didn't feel that about anybody. You just read what this man wrote, okay? Line by line by line. This guy was plugged into the machinery of the universe. I think he's unimpeachably brilliant. Unimpeachably brilliant. And let me read again what we heard from Mike Shermer earlier in Isaac Newton's writings. By the way, in his Principia, here's the page 1, page 0 of Principia. In it, he discovers the laws of motion, F equals ma, discovers the laws of gravity. It's all there. And he did this all before he turned 26. And in this, when he talks about motion, there's no reference to God. When he talks about his two-body force that he deduced, this universal law of gravitation, there is no mention of God. It's just not anywhere there because he understood it. He was on top of it. He was there. Even though the understanding of the motions of the planets before he came along was given unto God because nobody understood it. Or nobody understood well enough to really believe that they had a full predictive handle on it in the way the universal law of gravitation supplied. And so what you have is Isaac Newton abandoning reference to God until he realizes that if all you do is calculate the two-body problem, here we have like the moon and Earth. Yes, he's got that calculated. Now you have the sun and the Earth. You got that. But wait a minute, now the Earth and the moon go around the sun, and sometimes we're close to Mars and sometimes we're not. And when it comes near Mars, there's a tug that's stronger there than in any other part in the orbit. And then it comes over here, and then Jupiter tugs. And it's all these mini tugs. And so he's got to do this two-body problem for Earth, the moon, Earth and the sun, Earth, moon, and Mars, Earth, moon, Mars, and Jupiter, and it becomes a rapidly complex problem. And he realizes that, in fact, applying this simple sort of approach to calculating the stability of the solar system, he finds he can't stabilize the solar system. He can't account for how we have stayed this way for as long as what was possibly necessary from the beginning of the universe. And so what does he say? He's at his limits. He's at his limits. And so you read Principia, God is nowhere until you get to the general Sholem. And then he says the 6 primary planets. Back then there were 6 planets, okay? Now there's 8, in case you haven't been keeping track. Even if you thought there were 9, there are now 8. The 6 primary planets are revolved about the sun in circles concentric with the sun, and with motions directed towards the same parts and almost in the same plane. He's got the whole picture now, and he's trying to sort of account for that. But he can't just simply doing two-body calculations, certainly not without a computer or without a new kind of mathematics. He says, but it is not to be conceived. But is it not to be conceived that mere mechanical causes could give birth to so many regular motions? This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. This is Isaac Newton invoking intelligent design at the limits of his knowledge. So, you know this story. I have to tell it because it's just great. All right? So Laplace, Pierre Simon de Laplace, at the end of the 18th century, wrote a 5-volume tome on celestial mechanics. A brilliant piece of work. It's there. It weighs a lot on the shelf. And what it does is it takes Newton's laws of gravity and brings them into a full expression with the hammer of calculus. Okay? He brings all the armament of mathematics to bear on the laws of physics that were put forth by Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton only touched on them. They were not fully developed. And in this work, he demonstrates, he further develops something that had been percolating in the mathematical community, but he develops, and one might even say perfects, a branch of math we would call perturbation theory, where instead of pulling your hair out saying, well, how do you calculate this pair of forces and this pair, and all the equations go to hell, in perturbation theory, it allows you to systematically and reliably calculate the effect of a small tug in the presence, a series of small tugs in the presence of singular big tugs. And that's kind of what what's going on in most of the solar system. And when you do that, and you do that properly, you can demonstrate, notwithstanding effects of chaos, which have other timescales related to them, you can demonstrate that, in fact, the solar system was stable beyond the predictions of Isaac Newton. So he figures this out. does not invoke God because he figured it out. And in a story that may be apocryphal, but I see more in support of it than against it, this time coincides, of course, with the era of Napoleon, Napoleon being French, and Laplace being French. No translation necessary. Napoleon, if you visited his library, it's not just sort of books of world history and battles. It's engineering books. It's physics books. This man wanted to know where his cannonballs would land, all right? He was much more than just sort of a lucky general. He was into the physics, the engineering, and the material science of war. And so he immediately summoned up the 5-volume production of Laplace, read it through, cover to cover, called in Laplace, and said, "Sir, I have the exact quote here. Hang on. Napoleon asked him what role God played in the construction and regulation of the heavens. This is kind of like, that's what Newton would ask, right? Laplace replies, "Sir, I had no need for that hypothesis." And so what concerns me now is, even if you're as brilliant as Newton, you reach a point where you start basking in the majesty of God, and then your discovery stops. It just stops. You're kind of no good anymore for advancing that frontier, waiting for somebody else to come behind you who doesn't have God on the brain and who says, "That's a really cool problem, I want to solve it." They come in and solve it. But look at the time delay. This was a 100-year time delay. And the math that's in perturbation theory is like crumbs for Newton. He could have come up with that. The guy invented calculus just on a dare, practically. When someone asked him, Ike, how come planets orbit in ellipses and not some other shape? And he couldn't answer that. He goes home for 2 months, comes back, out comes integral differential calculus, because he needed that to answer that question. And so this is the kind of mind we were dealing with Newton. He could have gone there, but he didn't. He didn't. His religiosity stopped him. All right? Our numerals are called what? Arabic numerals. They ever stop and think about that? You know, in America, do we take pause at this? Why are they called Arabic numerals? Okay, they fully exploit the discovery of the zero, create a whole field called algebra, itself an Arabic word. Algorithm is an Arabic word. All this is going on, and it's all traceable, not to some long 1,000-year tradition in Islam. It's traceable to this 300-year period. This 300-year period. And then, so they had naming rights. The most expensive, beautifully carved astrolabes come out of this period. There's a great collection of these at the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, if you ever want to check them out. So navigation, celestial navigation, all of this is traceable to this period. And so something happened. And what happened, as was previously described, I was told, and forgive me for repeating from what you might have heard, 12th century kicks in, and then you get the influence of this scholar, Al-Ghazali. All right? And so out of his work, you get the philosophy that mathematics is the work of the devil. And nothing good can come of that philosophy. That, combined with other sort of philosophical codifications of what Islam was and would become, the entire intellectual foundation of that enterprise collapsed, and it has not recovered since. Over that period, all these books were translated into Arabic on a scale not seen since then. And so why am I even going here? Because I'm trying to explain to you that you fast forward, the dangers here is that you fast forward to 21st century America and ask, what influences are we feeling now? Because that naming period in Islam stopped and it never recovered. Because the way of thinking about the natural world, revelation replaced investigation. Okay? So I fast forward to 21st century, and what do you find? You get things like this. Okay? This is in America. All right? So now, what I find interesting is the level of passion that it requires to actually do it. You got to pay for this, okay? And it means a lot of people are pissed off at the Big Bang. They're pissed off at the Big Bang. At our museum in New York, the American Museum of Natural History, they come to the Big Bang exhibit, and sometimes I don't feel like having that conversation. I say, why don't you go to our hall of human biology first? and then come to us. And that's where we have sort of monkeys holding hands with people in skeleton forms, and then they never make it back to the Big Bang. They're gone forever. Okay? So however egregious the Big Bang is, monkeys and people is a worse transgression, apparently. So there's that, but there's also, here's a little bit of intelligent design here. Here's one that wants to accept the science, but then is like what's before the Big Bang. We don't quite know yet, so God was there. So of course, intelligent design is basically a God of the gaps.